Hi guys, good evening and welcome to this session on the day one analysis for NMAT 2020. So this is the first NMAT that is completely adaptive in nature, like the GMAT conducted by GMAC. So obviously this has been a new experience for most of you as students, most of us in the industry, and anybody who has been an NMAT test taker. So how was NMAT today different from the NMAT taken earlier over the years? What were student experiences? What was the difficulty level of each section? What could be estimated cutoffs, etc., are things that we will look at today in our short discussion. And then that could help you prepare for the NMAT over the next 2.5 months. And you could time and prepare your attempts accordingly. So let's go through the overall discussion. I will split my discussion into three parts. So let me just share my screen and we could then go on to the overall discussion. So here as we, let's say, what are the key points that we need to discuss today as part of the overall analysis for NMAT? One would be the essentials of the exam. What do I mean by the essentials? The key points that we need to keep in mind with respect to the documentation, the preparedness. I mean, what do you need to take? What are the points of caution, etc. Then we will move on to each section, the overall sectional strategy, the sectional breakup, and finally we will come up with the cutoffs. Now, I'm not saying that these cutoffs will be the last and final word, because this was just day one. It's a very small sample size. And of course, as we see more and more attempts, once people take retakes, then we'll have a clearer picture. So let's start with the first point here, which is the essentials and the overall experience. So what do I mean by this? I took NMAT today in the 12 o'clock slot. And over the years, when I've taken NMAT, I have seen that the NMIMS authorities or the GMAC authorities have always been very strict and very meticulous with respect to the overall conduct of the exam. So this includes documents, this includes the overall process with respect to timing. Each step is very well thought through and very well executed. So here, what are the key things that you need to keep in mind? One, NMAT always asks you to carry a printout of your admit card. Now, the NMAT admit card is a very, very specific and unique document by itself, because it has 3 blanks for your attempt 1, retake, and retake 2. So every time you go, you need to take the same copy of the admit card, which means that if you are planning 2 or more attempts, then this is one document that you need to really take care of over the next 2 months. So when you go for your first attempt, the first line of this card will be signed and kind of stamped by the invigilator there. Also, this admit card will mention the 2 documents that you have mentioned, one as your ID proof and the second as your signature proof. So ideally, I would suggest that whatever has been mentioned there, please ensure that you have the original document mentioned as on the admit card handy with you. I would also suggest keep one self-attested copy of these ID cards with you. Apart from this, what else do you need? So you need the confirmation email. Now this year, because of the COVID situation, the NMAT authorities have allowed you to show this email on phone as well. However, you could call me slightly old school, but I would say that it's best to carry a printout of this as well. The reason for this being, what if your phone develops a glitch there, or what if you are in an erratic network college or center? What do you do in that case? So it's always better to have a backup. So these are the 4 things that I would suggest you should always have: your admit card, your confirmation email, the 2 primary and secondary IDs along with photocopies. This is documentation. Now coming to prep, under the current COVID scenario, one is something that could be called mandatory things that you need to carry, and the second are optional precautions that you could take. So by now, of course, you know that going anywhere in this COVID scenario necessitates a mask. So here in NMAT, this is something that is absolutely mandatory. No center will entertain you without a mask, so please ensure that you carry one. Among the optional things that you can have with you, you could have gloves. Of course, it's handy, but then you need to ensure that you are comfortable using the mouse and the keyboard along with gloves. So most centers do not insist on them. So carry them only if you are comfortable. You could have a face shield. Again, this could be more a matter of comfort, discomfort versus anything else. So use it only if you're comfortable. If you want water, you are allowed to carry your own water. Generally, NMAT does not allow this. Here you are allowed, but you need to take your own transparent water bottle. And these are the 3-4 things that they have allowed. You are also allowed a sanitizer. But in our center, they didn't really insist for it. Please ensure that they have given you a 45-minute limit. I would generally always say that in the current scenario where transportation is not as easy to find as say a normal year, it's always better to try and reach at least 1 hour in advance so that you are comfortable at the center, you've seen everything, and try and maintain a certain distance. So having looked at these key points here with respect to the login process or with respect to the pre-exam process, now we move on to the login process. As we saw, typically NMAT has a 3-step login process. So the first is the non-disclosure agreement, which will basically, this will be for 2 minutes and you need to sign it within 2 minutes. Else your exam gets terminated. So please do not waste too much time here. Read it quickly, sign it. Then there will be a tutorial. This tutorial needs to be, I believe this is 10 minutes. So this tutorial needs to be, you know, gone through in great detail. It will be very helpful for you as a student. In fact, you should, ideally, I believe this tutorial used to be available on the NMIMS website as well. So if possible, you should go through it before. But even if you can't, then it will definitely be available there. You have ample time. Please go through it. Finally, you have the section order selection. So here, typically NMAT earlier used to give you 6 combinations. This time round, they have allowed you to drag and drop the section names and select your section. It's just a change in the UI of the page. Nothing really differs. Like earlier, you can select your sections and then start the test. Once the test starts, as we all know, you cannot skip a question. You cannot go back to a question. So you need to ensure that every question that you start is attempted quickly or in a reasonable amount of time, so that you have enough time to arrive at the 35th, 36th question in the overall time available to you for that section. So having looked at all of this, let's now move on to each section, how it was and what could we expect in the forthcoming days. So when we consider the 3 sections, first being QADI, followed by LR, And this is the order that I selected, followed by VARC. Now, obviously, because of the NMAT NDA, and I need to respect that, so I will not give you exact question types, or I will not tell you that there were so many questions of this type. However, I will give you a broad guideline as to how I found the section, and based on that, you will need to arrive at your own conclusions as to what needs to be prepared. So, firstly, one thing that I can say is that the NMAT demo tests given in the official NMAT guides are very good reference points to understand how the actual NMAT will look. So if we look at the overall QADI section, we know that this section is generally divided into three parts. So you have DI, data sufficiency, and QA. As we had all expected, the data sufficiency, the DI section corresponded to roughly or exactly 33% or 1/3 of this section. Now we all know from the announcement that this was 36 questions in 52 minutes. What were some of the key features that I saw or experienced in this section? So as I said, DI 33%, that is 3 sets of 4 questions each. While I won't go into the exact details, but over the years, I have seen that NMAT has a unique style of asking DI questions, where if you have multiple graphs, for instance, then NMAT will make you link the two graphs. So there is one data point that needs to be taken from the upper graph, something else that needs to be correlated to it from the lower graph, and then the calculation is done in order to arrive at your answer. So it's not just observational, it's not logical, it is calculation oriented. But at the same time, a key factor in the DI questions of NMAT is the focus on units. So for example, I might say that this value is in rupees per million. So let's say the GDP of a country is in rupees per million and some other values given in rupees billion. Then you need to correlate the two. So this trend was something that we observed to a large extent even now. As given in the demo test and the official study guide, there was no geometry, no time and distance. However, there was across both of these, there was a lot of focus on arithmetic. Some of the other NMAT favorites were also represented, and this I have heard from a number of students. So you had questions on PNC, probability, something on APGP, and a lot of questions on areas like say profit loss ratio, etc. So I would say a great amount of the focus was on arithmetic, modern maths, and algebra, especially with numbers and equations. So these are areas that I would like to focus on as a student if I were to be taking NMAT in the next few days. How was the difficulty level of the section? Now, considering that I've got possibly one of the highest scores recorded at least on the first day. So I can say that my paper kept getting tougher progressively, because that is the nature of an adaptive test, that once your answers keep going right, your questions keep getting tougher. But on the whole, I did find this section moderate to difficult. NMAT typically has the the nature of the questions in NMAT is of a very high quality. It generally reflects the quality seen in say an exam like a GMAT. So that is something which I observed today as well. I would definitely not call it an easy section, so as to say. For every quant question that I had to put in some thought, even the easy ones. I had to put in some thought and understand that, okay, this is the basic concept being tested. So this is what I need to do. So if I have, just for an example, if I have, say, sum of an AP or sum of n terms of a GP, then I need to convert the question into that application and figure out that, okay, this question asks this. So for NMAT, be prepared to solve slightly tough QADI sets and questions. You will be better prepared when you go for the actual exam. Coming to the LR section here, where once again we had 36 questions, 40 minutes. So in this case, we were all anticipating that the focus on critical reasoning would go up, and this clearly happened, with roughly 50% of the section being allocated to critical reasoning. Now here, what do I count within critical reasoning? Course of action, strong weak arguments. These generally have always tended to be favorites of NMAT. So if I am an aspirant, I would definitely want to practice these. So syllogisms, course of action, strong weak arguments, normal strengthening and weakening of arguments, which is very different from strong weak arguments, inferences, assumptions, cause and effects. All of these are question types that I would want to practice. The good part about these questions is obviously you do not need to spend too much time trying to solve them. But in NMAT, the options tend to be close enough. So you need to be very careful while attempting these questions. One of the key things, especially because it's an adaptive exam, is that you know, even if you feel that a certain question could have a different answer, you cannot go back to that question. So you will have to find the balance between not spending too much time on a question and answering it after a thorough analysis, especially for critical reasons. So this is something which I observed with respect to the closeness of the answers today, and that has been common student feedback as well. Apart from this, if I consider the pure analytical reasoning side, what I did observe was that there were 3 sets. Now, very clearly, please do not infer that if I had 3 specific sets, let's assume, for instance, that I had family tree, I had sequential output, and I had, say, circular arrangement. I didn't have all that. That is why I'm saying this. Suppose I had these 3, then please do not assume that you will also have that, because there are so many slots. And secondly, the questions that you will get will be dependent on the answers that you or on your nature of answers earlier. However, what I did see was that one of the 3 sets was fairly easy and 2 of them turned out to be moderate. Now, whether this was by design or whether this was a consequence of my answering sequence, I will not know. Within each set, we do not know whether the adaptive algorithm works within a set, which means suppose I have a linear arrangement of 4 questions, then I don't know whether the algorithm tests that my first answer is wrong or right. Accordingly, the second question is asked. Frankly, right now, I would not try to go as per any assumption of that kind. I would simply solve the set as it is. So I did see roughly, I could say anywhere around 10 to 12 questions based on these. So if you see 18 questions here and 12 questions here, takes away directly 30 questions out of 36, which leaves only 6 questions for random puzzles. And there were, single questions of these types, covered a lot of different areas, fairly doable, but their difficulty level will again vary based on your individual attempts. How would I classify this section? So I would say LR was moderate. I wouldn't call it very difficult, but again, it depends on how good you are at critical reasoning. So if you find it comfortable, it could be called moderate. If you are not very comfortable, then it could become a difficult section. Finally, coming to VARC, where we once again had 36 questions with a time limit of 28 minutes. So this is where, in terms of the overall structure, and we all had anticipated this, that some question types have gone out and some question types have seen an increase in their presence. So broadly, what are the question types that we had seen in the demo test? That is what has been reflected here. So once again, if we look at RCs, 3 RCs, that is 12 questions, 33%. Qualitatively, if I consider the RCs, I would say anywhere around 500 words, lot of inferential questions with close options. So I wouldn't call the RCs easy, definitely. Having said that, this will once again depend on the kind of attempts that you've made before and after each RC. Apart from these, what were the other question types that were very heavily represented? So you had analogies, you had a lot of fill in the blanks, which were of two types. One are those standard single or double blanks, which are based on vocabulary and grammar. The other were those very specific to NMAT preposition based fill in the blanks. Then you have para jumbles and mark the error. When I look at these question types, I found these tricky. I found para jumbles to be tricky. In my particular test, I would say these were far more doable. And the RCs, I would say, were moderate to tough. Now, does this mean that everybody will get this kind of a breakup? Not necessarily, and I would say most likely not, because once again, it will depend on your attempts and your overall performance. So if I were to look at this section again in its entirety, I would say that this could be classified as a moderate to tough section or a moderate to difficult section. So on the whole, if you are preparing for NMAT and if you want to clear your cutoffs, then please do not expect an easy test. It is liable to be moderate to tough. Finally, when I come to the cutoffs, what kind of cutoffs can we expect to see? So today on day one, we've heard scores like 250, 260, 274, 278. These are actual scores that have been heard of today. In such a scenario, we do expect the scores to go even higher for some students as they practice and appear for the test later. For some students who have taken the test now and will be attempting it again, say after a month, a second attempt could give them an even higher score. Which means that when I look at the old cutoffs of 210, 8 to 210, these may not really be the cutoffs that I am looking at now. With the kind of scores that we are looking at, I would say you should start aiming for a performance that crosses 220. So, which basically means that your individual sections, your quant will have to start going above 75. Especially considering the time that you have. Your LR will start going, even if you divide it equally, then it has to be at least 75. Now, based on your strengths, you can individually calibrate your score in each section, but you will need to start aiming for that kind of a score. So this was the broad overview of NMAT as we saw it today. As more and more details emerge, we might come back to you with those details and a prep strategy a few days down the line when you need to make your second attempt. Till then, use this data to prepare for NMAT, to take mocks. You should try and take anywhere between 6 to 10 mocks before you take the test. Acclimatize yourself with each section. Prepare various question types, especially within LR verbal, and be prepared to solve questions very quickly within NMAT, which will enhance your score. So, having said that, I wish you all the best, do well, and thank you for being patient here. So, we will be back with a further analysis once more data is available and with how to prepare for a second attempt a few days down the line. Thank you and all the best.